Hi, everyone. My name is Niko Bonatsos. I'm a managing director at General Catalyst. It's my pleasure today to be on stage at Startup Grind with Job, founder Voort, founder and CEO of Remote.com, to chat about leading through adversity. As you might have all seen and heard, the markets have changed a little bit in 2022. And Job is an experienced leader. We're going to have a conversation about some of the learnings and what's lying ahead. Our firm, General Catalyst, it has a mission to invest in positive and powerful change that endures. We have offices in San Francisco, New York, Boston, and London. And personally, I've been with the firm for the last 12 years, currently mostly focusing on investing in technical Gen Z founders who are building the future face of the internet with other technical friends of theirs. So, Job, let's start with you. Introduce yourself, please.
Thanks, Niko. Thanks for having me. I am the co-founder, CEO of Remote. Before this, I was at GitLab for 5 years, where I joined the team very early and led product there. And before that, I was a neuroscientist, which didn't pan out, but I think I turned out all right. And for reference, I live in the Netherlands in a little village here. I have 2 small kids and a wife. I guess that's it. You can see my hobbies in the background, at least part of them.
Lovely. So, Remote.com grew really quickly. The company is now about 3 years old, right?
Yeah.
And you got to over 1,000 employees in a short period of time, many hundreds of customers. So the story from 2019 to 2021 was like grow, grow, grow. And then 2022 came about. It was about unit level economics that matter and grow more efficiently. How did that change, Phil?
Yeah, it was I guess for us, it was a relatively big change because for us, our growth phase sort of started in 2020. We onboarded our first customer like halfway through the year in 2020. We raised $300 million in the beginning of this year. And then suddenly we had to switch from exactly that, from growth, just grow to changing that. It was a big change. I think that if you run a company for a while, it's a welcome change, right? When you grow at all costs, it can feel very much like you're out of control, right? Like if you're just pushing money into the system, if you're hiring a lot really, really quickly, like there's no way you can do it as diligently as you were to do it in a much slower pace. And so to change pace, but also to change the way that we think about our financials, I know for me, it felt like a really satisfying thing to do, something you can grab onto, and you get a greater sense of control in a lot of ways, but it certainly is a large change.
Absolutely. And obviously, like change always, starts from the top. So great to hear that for you, it was like a welcome change. But you are running a sizable executive team and a sizable org. How do you go about communicate the need for change to your executive team and the rest of the company?
Yeah, I think I had a lot of lessons, I would say. I think the first one is that and I believe this about almost anything in running a business, it's best to be really transparent and very direct about what is happening and what are we doing about this, right? And in this case, I think it was very clear what is happening in the world and what is happening in the economy. And even if it wasn't clear, I made sure to make it incredibly clear. What does it mean, if the economy is going into a downturn or even a recession, our customers are businesses. And so if the economy is doing bad, that means that businesses are doing bad, and that means our customers will be doing bad. That can be a hard thing to hear, right? And for most of the people in our organization, they have been with a company that has only been doing incredibly well nonstop, and only good news every single week that I talk to the company. And now to hear me say, look, we have to be much more diligent because something is coming and we have to be prepared for that. I guess that is a hard message to hear. And the best way to do it is by being really, really transparent, really clear, and then repeating it a lot. Secret of leadership, like you can't say it once and act like it didn't happen. Repeat it and then show this is what we're going to do. This is what we're thinking about. This is what we're not sure about. And then keep repeating that and continuously be very clear about it. And especially if you say, well, we're going to make changes, or we will anticipate making changes, to call back up on that. we're making these changes because of this, right? This is what we're anticipating. It also helps you yourself to like frame all of this really, really well, and it feels like you're in control.
Exactly. So remote has many hundreds of customers today in a short period of time, as you mentioned, and they also have to adapt to this new environment. What have you learned from them?
Yeah, good and bad, I suppose. I think we had the luxury of experiencing customers that, despite things being bad, right? Like, we'll talk about the funding climate, but like the funding climate being bad, the economy doing bad, there's been a lot of customers that are doing incredibly well regardless. And like for them, this recession almost doesn't exist. I think that has been good to see. And then, yeah, a large number of them, you know, in varying degrees doing well or not doing well, downsizing their business, right? And we've seen this. I think one thing that we see is that companies that have to downsize their business in some way, for example, by going through a reduction in force, the ones that are doing it well do it in a short period of time, very directed, and make sure to not have to repeat it and do it again. And others do it take a much longer time, which is, you know, damaging to the organization for a large part. I think that has been interesting to see. It's also good, you know, because we have customers that need to pay us. It definitely is interesting to see how they deal with that relationship and how they talk to us. And I think the best customers for us are the ones that are really communicative, and then just tell us this is what it's like, and this is the state at which we're in.
Yep. So how has this change in the market conditions affected your product roadmap? You're like a very product vision heavy CEO. And when, you know, the budgets are not going to be as like sizable as they were before, how do you make these changes to tweak the product roadmap and maybe, you know, tune down the ambition a little bit, trim your team? Like, what happened?
Yeah, not tune down the ambition. I think that one stays the same. I think the thing is, and you're taught this, right? Like when you're starting a startup, it's all about focus. When you have little constraints, it can be really hard to focus. So if you're doing growth at all costs and there's infinite money available, it's really hard to do it. And suddenly, if those constraints start to become much more strict, that is the moment where you know, it becomes a little bit easier to focus. If it doesn't, you have a problem. And I think that is how we treated this, right? Like, so in a very fundamental way, nothing really changed about the way we think about the business, what we want to achieve, and our mission. But it did help us, you know, focus on what is most important, and maybe get rid of some things that weren't really important, but we gave ourselves, you know, maybe a bit too much slack to work on those. And, you know, the thing is that it works really well, both as like, that's the right thing to do for you, for the business, for everybody involved with it. But if the circumstances are such that drives this further focus, it also helps that explaining to teams, right? If you're maybe working on something that is not as important to the company, then now you will be, and that helps as well, right? If it's framed correctly.
Yep. So remote also unfortunately had to part ways with some of our awesome team members. How was that experience? What advice do you have for other founders who haven't done it yet?
Yeah, I mean, it's an inevitability, right? If you build a company, you're going to get to the point where you have to lay off people. It always sucks. It never is fun. Like, it's a really bad thing. Like, it feels bad to do, but it's important that you do it not when you're at the edge of the cliff, right? We took a really sensible approach on how we did it, and we had really clear reasons. We had really deep understanding of what we wanted to achieve, right? In our case, we decided we don't need these roles anymore, right? And so if you don't need roles anymore and you have extra baggage, so to say, in your organization, in terms of this is spent to particular activities that we don't need anymore, you should really not hang on to those, right? That is how you run a company well, by getting rid of what you don't need. And I'm not talking about the people, I'm talking about the roles that were fulfilled. And so once you've decided that, you made this really conscious choice of like, we're going to change our organization. Maybe we're going to shrink our organization in a particular way. That is when you start to think about, well, which people will be involved and how do we make sure they live with the best feelings possible, right? How do we make sure we can take care of them? And you take the time to plan this. This is a really difficult exercise. I mean, you could use a company like Remote, which we will make it a lot easier if you employ 3 people through us, but nonetheless, it is a difficult exercise, also a very emotional one for everybody involved. So it's best to prepare really, really well and then execute that plan in the shortest period of time as possible so that the impact, emotional and cultural impact to your company is as small as possible. And if you do all of that, it still sucks, but it is the right thing to do for your company, right? And then it will put you in a better place than it was before. And so, yeah, I guess that is prepare well.
Yep. So remote work versus hybrid work versus in person. Now that we're, post-COVID, if you ask most people, you're a huge proponent, obviously, of remote work. What are you seeing now in the market? Like, what are you seeing from your customers? Let's start with that first, and then talk about, remote.com just continuing to be fully distributed.
Yeah, I think what we sort of hoped that would happen has happened, which is that individuals are realizing that the work that they do, they can do it from anywhere, right? If you're a knowledge worker, you don't have to come into the office. Like, we have the tools already, and now you know that there's other employers that allow you to work remotely. So your current employer has a lot of pressure on them to allow you to continue to work remotely. And that's sort of what we are seeing. We see companies going back to the office, but like the companies that recruit the best people, and especially, companies that are fully knowledge workers, there's no hardware involved. Yeah, they tend to essentially operate fully remotely, whether they have offices or not. They tend to start using those offices as like co-working spaces. This is what we see with our customers. This is what we hear from the market as well. And it is sort of what we anticipated that would happen. I do think that there's a number of people that are like, well, I don't have the space in my house, or I don't have the kind of life that allows me to work from home. I want to work from an office. And some of those people really prefer to go work for companies that do have offices. And I completely understand that. But, those companies tend to work remotely anyway. The office just becomes a co-working space. And so that has been really good to see.
Are you seeing people, meaning customers, be now more excited to hire remote workers as a means to save money, make sure, they stay on budget, and because you can hire more loyal people in other geos? Like, is this, something that is now becoming a real trend, you think?
Yeah, it has been. I think cost is not always the driver, although it certainly helps. I think one of the main drivers that we continue to see is like a shortage in labor, right? Here in the Netherlands, it's a huge subject and everybody's complaining about it. But like, it essentially is solved the moment you open a remote position, right? If you say, I'm going to allow people to work from wherever they are, I'm going to hire internationally, right? So not just within the US, not just within the country in which you are. It solves the entire labor shortage problem. And yeah, we see that. We only see it increasing. I think the thing that we anticipated was that at first, leading companies, smaller startups that would take more risks would start to do this, and we're already doing this. And now we're at the point that we see global organizations doing this more and more and more and more. And so that has been really interesting to see, and really good. Yeah.
Very cool. So remote.com raised 5 rounds in 2.5 years, right?
Yeah. 500
So this
million.
is like above, the average pace. Normally the fastest growing top company is raising around every 9 to 12 months.
Yeah.
Went through the particle accelerator to accelerate everything over the last 2 years because it was the wild time. And companies were raising the fast growing ones every 3 to 6 months, which normally is not the case. How was that experience for you as a CEO?
Crazy. It's really busy. I think we were lucky, of course, in a lot of ways that we were able to get to that point. I think it's incredibly exhausting. It's a really difficult process. I started companies before, but they were all terrible. But as far as VC-backed companies, I'm a first-time founder, and so you have to learn a lot really, really quickly, which in some ways is good, but in a lot of ways it's just really challenging. It's a roller coaster, and I count ourselves incredibly fortunate that we were able to do this and scale the company up this quickly. Yeah. I think that's the main thing I could get away with. I wouldn't necessarily say it was fun, but like it certainly was like really cool.
So as your investor and board member, I would say the first 4 rounds came about pretty quickly,
Yeah.
easily during the very good times. And then the most recent round happened right as the market, started changing. And
Yeah.
in the beginning, change felt okay, but then it was accelerating.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting learning opportunity. What would you share for like people who are founders and are raising capital when the knife is falling? Like, what are some of the lessons learned, for you?
Yeah, my advice has always been the same, which is to be really transparent. Always don't don't never try to be sneaky. That will not do you any well. Over communicate and rush the process, right? Like I think you as a founder have much more to lose than anybody on the other side of the table, especially in early rounds, like before you have like mega overwhelming traction or like a lot of competition. If VCs are not competing for you, and it could be because the market is bad, right? Not just because you're not performing well. That means that you have to rush the process. Like it's like you have to, and that's a very different experience than if your company is hot and the market is like there's everywhere money and VCs are competing for deals, because then you can just sit around essentially waiting, which you shouldn't do. You should still rush the process and really condense it in as little time as possible. But I think that's the most important thing. And continuously seek clarity. Where do I stand? How do they think about me? I think there's been definitely a number of investors over the years, even in previous rounds, that are very comfortable stringing you along. And so you have to push for like, can we actually make this happen? Are you the one that's able to make the decision? How does the process look like? At what point can you get me a term sheet, etc. It was all very easy with you, Niko, because it went really fast.
Indeed, yeah. So, I mean, I can share a little bit what we're seeing from my vantage point. So, GC is a multi-stage venture capital firm. We write chains that range from $250,000 to $200 million. So, what we've seen since January 1st, but in particular the last, like 3 to 4 months, we've seen like a return to the basics for venture capitalists. So, there's less action for anything that's tech-enabled, any kind of project that's perceived as capital intensive, and also some of the out of geo investing, like opportunities in like Africa, LATAM, other, geographies that were pretty hot. And in the Zoom investing era over the last year and a half, the valuations and the speed of the deal execution there was the same as if this were to be, Silicon Valley companies. That stuff is kind of coming out of favor now. At the seed stage, we haven't seen any real chains at the seed stage, so everything is very active. However, there are some cracks now for any companies that raise the first seed round and are trying to raise a seed two or series seed or seed prime, all these, seed 2, 3, 4 rounds that were happening very easily over the last few years. And no seed stage companies were going out of business, which is really rare if you think about it. So now, we're seeing soberness, for any company that raised the first seed round that can't make it to raise a Series A, but needs some extra time. Series A, the bar is higher, I would argue, like for consumer-facing stuff. We would like to see product market fit. For enterprise, if you are one of the fortunate teams to be perceived as a high-quality team because like you worked at good places before, had good roles. Still over there, the market conditions, I would say, are pretty good. Growth, growth is slower. So unless you're running a company that's exceeding plan, is one of one, or ideally both, everything is trickier because especially, the crossover investors who have largely, left the scene. They go open up their Charles Schwab brokerage account. They can see what they can buy, from the public markets. Then they go and talk to some private CEOs who haven't adjusted in their heads the valuations. The boards, didn't, do the same quickly enough. And as a result, there's that, game of chicken going on. It's been going on since the beginning of the year, but it's much more, clear now. What's interesting, in my opinion, is that now there's a whole new founder talent pool coming in, like Gen Zers. Those people are like blissfully ignorant of what's going on because they don't work for any, big companies that are cutting budgets. that just graduated, from school. They're like unaware of the market conditions. And there's some new distribution channels that they are like obsessed with, like Discord, TikTok. So this opens up new opportunities, especially for new consumer-facing plays to get built. We're also seeing a number of what I would describe as disgruntled technical talent working for late-stage companies, or in particular, companies that went public in recent years and the share prices haven't performed well. So there's people who are working from home, sometimes, just working for 2, 3 hours a day, moonlighting on another project. Um, they are eager to be liberated and start something on their own, because if you're a younger um, uh, side of the house and you don't want to become a VP or C-level executive at a company and you stop learning, you don't see how you're going to make a lot of money, now's the time, for you to get started and do something else. So with that, I would like to thank Job for being with us, today. And thank you to Startup Grind for letting us be part of this awesome day.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you, everyone, for the attention. Bye.